Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Inverted Orthodoxy Podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm alongside Doug and Kyle. We are pastors at Living Springs Church, and we love this podcast where you ask questions and we give you answers. Sometimes they're really good. Sometimes they lead you on rabbit trails, and hopefully they make you think. That is the goal.
Hopefully the rabbit trails are also good.
Yeah, I was going to say. True enough. Altogether good.
Just not as direct. It's the scenic route to get to a
That's
good
right.
answer.
We enjoy theology. We enjoy all sorts of things as well. We were just talking hockey, so if you got hockey questions, you can send them in too. But mostly, we try and give you questions about your faith, or try to give you answers about your questions about faith. And yeah, today we have some AER.
Time for accusations, explanations, and recantations.
I will jump in at this point since this AER is again directed at you, Blake, because for the second time in the last number of weeks, you've done something, you've said something that offended someone.
All right.
I'm not saying they're offended, but that at least provoked a response. It says, thank you all for answering my question on Hebrews. Follow-up question for Blake, but all can chime in. You encourage us to keep praying for those in our lives who've walked away from faith. Any other practical tips? I honestly find it easier talking to those who don't know Jesus at all than trying to encourage my family who knew God and were hurt by the church and decided to leave it all behind. Would love any tips or insights you might have.
I completely agree with the person who wrote in this question. Years ago at youth, I did just how to witness to people or how to tell people about your faith. And I did like different chunks, like how to do it with someone you don't know, how to do it with a friend. And I specifically did family because I think that's the hardest place to share your faith, especially with those who've walked away and have already rejected that. There's just so many dynamics in family and layers of expectations and higher wants. Like I do care about people I don't know, but I care more so about my family as far as like I want them to follow Jesus. I want them to do the right thing. I want them to know truth. So, it just gets easy for me anyways to be judgmental of my family. Mm. And then I think it gets easy for them to resist my judgment and my good advice. So it just adds all those layers. I don't know.
But you're in good company with that being the same problem for Jesus.
Yeah, true enough. Yeah.
Right? Jesus had a hard time. His brothers and sisters and thought he was crazy.
Yeah.
The town where he grew up, he had a hard time performing miracles there. So if Jesus couldn't solve the issue, I'll relieve you of the burden of having to solve it also.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know. Tips. Be gentle. Like I would say, if you're like me, then you really have to fight your own judgment before you can offer any help, because you're probably not going to do any good by judging them. You're going to make them less than, and that's a bad thing right off the start. So my number one tip would be gentle and non-judgmental.
I think that there's two things that this person references. People who've walked away from faith and people who've been hurt by the church. And I think that if they've been hurt by the church, one practical tip is just to acknowledge that hurt is real.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Like sometimes we feel the need to defend the church, which is not what we should do. Like Christ goes to the marginalized, cares for the broken, is near the brokenhearted. So as a part of the church, to own that the church hurt you, I think that could bring some healing.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, beginning by listening. I found a lot of comfort in beginning with questions more than answers, and often discovering in a line I heard, I can't remember where from to be able to give credit for it, was, I also don't believe in that Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Like Brian Zond.
There you go. Like that's a very bridging thing all of a sudden, because all of us, myself included, and I'll throw you guys in there, we're walking around with distorted pictures of Jesus. Mm-hmm. So when somebody has been presented one of those, there's a good chance that part of why you're still here is because you've walked through those same things. Beginning to give permission for somebody to hold those frustrations and offer them a more beautiful way because you've been through it is really grounding. I have rarely walked into somebody who's frustrated with faith that I can't go, me too.
Yeah.
And so beginning with that as a conversation, an open door for letting those things be heard is often a really validating one. is going to become more and more common amongst my generation and up. The next generation is more like, church what?
Yeah.
So there'll be a difference there.
Wouldn't that be your generation and down?
No, I think millennials still have a higher exposure to Christianity and church than Gen Z do.
Yes, but are you talking about your generation and future generations? Not
No.
past generations?
My generation into yours and the ones above
Okay.
have more church hurt and have walked away from church for frustrations with theology
Okay.
and how God has been pictured.
Sorry,
The
I just thought
younger-
you were talking about moving towards younger, and I was like,
And the younger generations
Yeah,
just
I
are
understand.
lack of exposure to it all.
I've now got clarity on what you're saying.
And so just beginning to walk through those and finding commonality and testifying to the ability to have found healing in different ways around that. So somebody has the permission to still hold those wounds and scars and dare to journey back towards it gently and at the pace that the Holy Spirit would lead. But they then know that they're not alone in that journey.
Yeah, and I think as I'm listening to you and thinking about it more, I think the other piece for each of us personally when dealing with those people is getting over our own fear or dealing or acknowledging or whatever our fear, because especially with family members, again, the fear is that they're going to lose out on salvation or they're not going to make it to eternity with us in heaven. You know, are they going to walk the wrong way and make wrong decisions that are going to have bad consequences? So there's definite fear in that, right? And for myself, there's been many times with my own kids and own family members outside of that, just where I have to be like, that's not my job, right? Like I have to believe that God loves them more than I do.
Yeah.
So if I'm concerned about that, I believe God also is and has a better plan than I do.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
To that end, I would the practical tips, I would say relieve yourself of the sense of responsibility to soften their heart where it's hard. I think about the parable of the sower scattering seed, and I have seen people who have had a loved one who's walked away from faith, and I feel like without realizing it, what they're thinking they're going to do is they're going to soften the hard ground by just chucking a lot of seed at it really hard.
Dumping a bag of grass seed on a parking lot doesn't work.
Yeah, and I'm just going to keep whipping this seed as hard as I can at that concrete, and
Right,
eventually maybe it'll break up.
that's a great analogy. That is so true.
With the very best of intentions, right? But yes, trust that God loves them more than you. And when you see that the heart is open, scatter some seed.
Yeah.
But, I remember hearing about that parable as a kid, right? The person scattering the seed. And I remember being at Bible college and hearing one of our professors talk about, do you think that somebody who scatters seed scatters it the same on all of the terrain? Like, do you think that the guy scattering the seed is like, hi, a pathway. I'll throw a whole bunch of seed here, just as much as I would throw in good soil. They probably look for the good soil and scatter more, right?
Yeah.
And now, when you're talking about God, of course, God is constantly at work in all of our lives, and his resources are infinite. So to continue this analogy of scattering seed, he can do that liberally in every circumstance and in every situation. We can't. And I don't think that God would ask us to. So I think you could just go, okay, I will just let this person have some space and time, pray for them regularly, and love them well. And when I see the opportunity to say something, say it. But I don't think that means hide what you believe. There's a difference between just being honest and... I was talking to a family member yesterday, and as in the context of the conversation, I said, may God give you wisdom. They're not currently following Jesus at all.
Right.
But I genuinely mean, may God give you wisdom.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know how they received it or not, but I'm not going to hide my light. There's a balance between not hiding my light and me trying to break concrete with seed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. Very true. All right. Jump into the first question then. The story in the Old Testament of Jacob wrestling with God doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know why he was physically wrestling with God, and I don't know why God hurt him by dislocating his hip socket or whatever. And why did Jacob prevail instead of God in the first place? I feel like we can justify it as we justify anything, But it is a bizarre incident by any measurement.
The story of Jacob wrestling with God has become one of my favorite stories in the Hebrew Bible. It has become a story that I think about a lot and that I just love so much because if we approach the Hebrew scripture, well, all of the Bible, as meditative literature that we are supposed to use to just meditate on and go, who am I? Where am I in this story? What do I take from this story? How am I in this story already? This beautiful picture of Jacob wrestling with God and God initiating a fight with Jacob on probably one of the most stressful nights of his life.
Yep.
And the work that God is trying to do in him is illustrative of, I think, what the New Testament talks about when it talks about endure hardship as discipline. This idea that through the difficult seasons and the trials of life, God is going to work good in our lives if we are open to that good. That's Romans 8, that God works all things for our good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And I don't think we look at that in the context. And so what ends up happening is we're like, that means everything's going to work out the way that I want. That is not what that means. The good that God is working is conforming to the image of Jesus and transformation into Christ's likeness. That is the good that he's working, and that is why that good is limited to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Because if we resist God, then we're not going to enter into the wrestling match that is invited through enduring in this difficult season. And this beautiful picture of God showing up as a man and wrestling with Jacob on this night when he had so many other things on his mind is indicative of how God wants to take the challenges and the difficulties in our lives and use them to refine us and to work out our salvation and to mold us into the image of Jesus. I'll stop there. I could say a lot more. I'll stop there, but I just find this story so relevant to me, and I love it so much and find so much comfort in it.
Yeah. I echo everything you're saying. I will begin commenting of like, if you stop and read the Old Testament slow enough, there's a lot of bizarre incidents.
Yeah, this is the one you're picking.
To pick this one out of all of them, like there's a lot, and
the way God shows up is often like really weird.
Totally right. Very clearly, this is not meant to only be a story to testify of Jacob's interaction with God on that night, but an invitation for God's people forever. As Jacob is renamed Israel, God's people then are birthed out of that nation, and then the New Testament grafts the church into that same grouping, that God's people are those who will wrestle with him. Though pictured in that is not just we will wrestle with him, it shows so much about God. I love that God lets Jacob have the upper hand. And there's just this obvious lesson to me. I should be cautious with what I'm fighting for, because God will let me have it. He will let me have what I want, and ultimately that will lead to my own correction from him after. But man, I'm sometimes fighting for the wrong things and fighting against the wrong process. And so the invitation to view God as one who is generous enough to give us that space. God could have, and at one point just decides, sure, I'm going to pop your hip with one touch. And he can do that. But he allows us this process of wrestling with him, and he's slow with us. He gives himself over to pain and to endurance. Like, there's a picture of God that is in there that is so different than any other picture of God offered in the world. Of one who will make himself vulnerable for our sake and for our ability to get there. And eventually he'll still bring us along with his way. But a God who makes himself vulnerable is a beautiful picture that we see just that much more clearly in Jesus. This foreshadows so many different ways into who we know in Jesus, that when people put this dichotomy between Jesus of the New Testament and God of the Old, I think we're not looking hard enough. Like, God gives Jacob all night to wrestle with him. But I wonder if at any point Jacob would just go, stranger, I want to hear what you have for me, and just surrendered. Would that have been over? Was this something that God needed to go through Jacob with, to have this wrestling that he would learn? Like, I don't know. And there's so many different ways to see this story out. But it's this beautiful, patient picture of who God is for both his character and our benefit.
Yeah, Jacob has struggled his entire life against man.
Yeah.
He struggled against his brother Esau and manipulated things and worked his way to get Jacob's blessing and Jacob's birthright. Then he takes off out of town and skips Dodge to avoid dealing with the repercussions of that. He ends up at Laban's house, and there he and Laban go back and forth, and he's always wrestling with man. What I love about this picture is as he's about to enter into the first relationship of his life where there was a wrestling match, God calls him to wrestle with somebody else. He literally is born grasping Esau's heel, right? And so there is this wrestling that he has had forever. And he is somebody who's not afraid to wrestle. He's not afraid to fight and to get what he wants. And God shows up in this key moment to say, that's great. You've wrestled with man and overcome. Let's take that energy and let's put it towards a deeper and a bigger and a better end and wrestle with me. And he wrestles with God all night. And he does say, you've wrestled with God and with humans and have overcome. But he didn't overcome God because of his wrestling. Right? Because verse 25, when the man saw he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip. There's this idea of an even match, right? And God is like impressed with the fact that, wow, you're not giving up. You're not going to overpower me, but you're not going to give up. The overcoming doesn't come in the wrestling. It comes in the clinging. It comes in the point where Jacob finally stops and he reaches this place where he's just holding and asking for a blessing. And there's a beautiful picture here about when we finally come to the place of stopping wrestling, we're in the place to receive a blessing. We cannot wrestle a blessing out of God. We cannot manipulate a blessing out of God. We can wrestle with him for the rest of our lives. We will not get the blessing that way. The blessing comes when you ask. But sometimes you don't ask until you've wrestled yourself out.
Absolutely. Or ask the right question, right? Or whatever else. Yeah.
But that's part of the wrestling, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't physically wrestle with God. The wrestling that we normally engage in is the struggles with our doubt, the struggles with reconciling what we see in the world with what we're called to believe. All of these things. That's where our wrestling takes place. And this is a physical illustration of that profound spiritual truth that we are called to be people who wrestle with God, because God names him Israel in this story. God gives him a new name, Israel, which means those who wrestle with God. So that means all of the people, what became that nation, their identifying marker should have been people who wrestle with God. And now we have become grafted into that we would be people who say we are included among that people who would say we are people who wrestle with God. It bothers me when Christians don't enter into the wrestling matches of the things that are going on in their soul, and instead they just pretend like everything's okay, and I'll keep saying that my faith is secure and solid, even though inside I've got some real questions, as though God is pleased with that. I think sometimes those questions are prompted by the Spirit to start a wrestling match because God wants to do that. And the result of that wrestling match sometimes is we walk with a limp. And there's a reality to that we're not as strong as we once thought we were. We become more dependent on God. Whether Jacob lives with a limp the rest of his life, church history has said that, Jewish history has said that, but the Bible doesn't say that.
Right.
What the Bible says is at the end of his life, he blesses his kids while he's leaning on his staff. And that's where people get the idea that he limped forever. We know he's limping the next day. But Jewish history and church history has said that he lived for the rest of his life. That this idea of wrestling with God brought him to this place where he was in his own strength weaker, but ultimately stronger because he was leaning more into the grace of God. Beautiful story. I love the story. I'm sorry that this person doesn't understand it and is wrestling with it. I hope that maybe some of the answers we're giving is causing you to rethink the beauty of this story.
Is there a little bit of an insult to those who wrestle with God also, instead of just giving in and being present with God and asking God, that we're stubborn enough that we have to wrestle all night? That I'm just asking, in the contrast that gets made of the king that Israel chooses for themselves is a donkey herder because they're all stubborn like donkeys, and the king who God chooses for them is a shepherd who will lead them and guide them. Is there a little bit of a bitterness to also the name of those who wrestle with God? Why don't you just be with God and follow him and receive the blessing from him? Why do you have to wrestle so much?
Oh, I
that is also
100% think that, yes, absolutely. But I think that it's probably God puts that in there with a wink in his eye, being like, I know you have to do this.
Yeah.
Like, it would be really great if we didn't have to do this, if you could just trust. But I recognize as well that there's no other way for you.
It's like our kids who have to learn a lesson the hard way.
Yes.
That there are lessons that only will be learned that way because of human nature.
Yeah.
Like, I'll let you go through this and I'll be with you through it. I will be the safe one to wrestle. But you're going to have to do this because you're so stubborn.
Yeah, there's compliant children.
Yeah.
And yeah, it probably just goes easier for them. But yeah, some of them just need to wrestle. I think also, like, we've had questions about, people losing their faith. I guess that was kind of where we started with the AER today. And deconstruction and all those things. And I think sometimes that's the setup, right? Is if I don't wrestle with God, or people don't wrestle with God, or think, even from a I'm better than you, I don't have to wrestle with God. I just take this all as faith. I believe in God. When hardship comes, sometimes that really rocks people's faith, right? And they do lose it because they don't have an understanding of what's happening. I would suggest anyways that people who have wrestled with God probably have a better, are easier to go through things that are hard or when they don't understand it, because there's an understanding that I can wrestle with God rather than a distaste for it, or that's not okay, so then I got to throw everything out, right? Like, I don't know if I'm making that clear, but
To come to the place of those genuine, like, I think that there's this, when we talk about the journey of faith, what I have found in my life, and maybe I'm just stubborn and maybe I'm just a mule, I readily admit that. I always think about Psalm 91 verses 1 and 2. The Psalm 91 verse 1, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the protection of the Almighty. I can't remember exactly how it says. That's what we think that is faith. And I remember, like, I had this transformational moment in my life with Psalm 91, 1 and 2 at one point 30 some years ago. That we go, okay, I've heard the theology, I got the theology, I have the faith. But then verse 2 says, I will say, the Lord is my shelter. And there's this place where I think we come to what we think is faith, and what is it at a certain level faith. I'm not saying it's not. But then there has to be this wrestling through to this deeper place of faith where things move from our head to our heart. And that has never happened quickly for me. And I think there's probably people who are much better than me at lots of things, including probably faith. I'll readily admit that. But I do think that there's always this wrestling to get to the place where that faith gets solidified. I don't know that we are capable as humans, many of us, or I'll say the majority of us, maybe there are some who can, without doing that. In the Gospel of John, there's this story where Jesus is speaking, and it says, even as he spoke, many believed in him. And then the next verse says, to those who believed, he says, if you hold to my teaching, you really are my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Yeah. We just take the last bit, the truth will set you free. And we miss everything that came before it, right? Jesus is speaking to people who John says already believed. And he says, now that you believe, there's going to be a wrestling match, because what you're claiming to believe is going to conflict with what you thought in the past. And you got to wrestle through that, or you're just going to fall back to the old way of thinking.
Yeah.
And so I do think that it's far more common that we have to wrestle to get to that place of deeper faith than to get to it without that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
All right. Let's jump to the next question. It says, why do you think it says that God created the heavens and the earth? Did God not already have heaven? And why did God need the earth? Maybe to escape to? Maybe to have some darkness? But then he thought it was too much darkness.
I love that part of the question.
But then he thought it was too much darkness and made half of the time light, but he left some darkness. Why did he leave darkness if he is light? Even if this is metaphorical, which I don't believe it is, what does it mean?
Awesome. Let's parse this one out bit by bit. Why do you think it says God created the heavens and the earth to begin? Did God already have heaven? Heaven gets used in multiple layers of conversation and language, especially in both Greek and Hebrew. In comparison to our day, I've really appreciated reading the Bible Project's translation of the Sermon on the Mount. They, for instance, will reference our Father who is in the skies, because that word much more directly just references, in that context, literally the sky, not heavens as we think of it. Heaven also then means past the sky into space. Heavens also then means the presence where God, a place where God is. It also means just God himself, because wherever God is, therefore his presence is, therefore it is heaven. Jesus also references heaven as where God's will is being done. There are many layers to our word heaven. So in Genesis 1, this is specifically referencing the sky we can see, not heaven, the place we go when we die. To contrast just those two amongst all the other ones I offered. So it is simply referencing the environment in which the world and the human experiences the world can be seen. Ancient minds around the world as an experience were much more like a snow globe than we understand the world to be.
Correct.
That there was in the ancient mind, this is not this is not saying I'm right behind all these theories or anything. In the ancient mind, though, we can discuss this later, it was a flat earth with a dome over top of it, and that was a solid piece of world somehow that those skies are, which then contained humanity in them. They would see past that into the stars, and that's what we have with the starlights and all those pieces, those beings even that were up there. But to begin that story in Genesis chapter 1 is simply referencing the earth where humans live and the skies which we live under.
One of the books that I read recently just talked about God, and not that God needed to create, but basically that God needed to create. And I'm butchering I can't remember exactly how it's phrased, so I'm butchering it. That's why I'm talking really poorly. But just that God is life, and life creates.
Yep.
Like God is going to create because he's God. It's just what he does. Humans created in the image of God have this ability to create, and we have been creating ever since we first walked the earth. That even today you have people create music, create art, create buildings, we're constantly creating, and people will create just out of a hobby and just out of a passion. And that's part of being created in the image of God, that God, as the source of all life, couldn't help but create. It was going to happen. And so, what I love the way that you're asking this question. I love some of the things in it. Maybe he wanted to have some darkness, then it was like, whoa, too much darkness. Let's have a light switch here as well. I love that. But I think that the beautiful thing in Genesis 1 is just showing this infinitely creative God who creates because he longs to and wants to create because life is going to create.
And I think I'll join in with that. In God's choosing to create, the highest point of creation becomes humanity, and all of the creative work done before
on earth.
All of the creative work done before the arrival of humanity, creating all those other pieces, is for the benefit of other, which is beautiful. And so if you go through all the ordering of those 7 days, it is both ordering and then filling in pairs of 1 to 4, 2 to 5, 3 to 6 of the days there. And so God is orchestrating this beautiful and healthy environment for humanity. But it begins, as I said, by ordering and then filling. So on day 1, God creates light in the darkness that it is already pre-existent. And then day 4, God creates the sun and moon to be the things that give the light. Now, this is part of the beginning of my understanding for walking away from a 7-day creation view. How do we have light and darkness without a source of light and darkness? to begin off of that. And so how do you have a day 1, 2, 3 until you have a sun to indicate when it's day and night on day 4?
Well, and even the fact that the ancient mind thought that the moon was a source of light and not simply reflecting the sun.
Totally. So all these things are gifts that God gives because he is creative, but his creativity, unlike ours sometimes, isn't just for the sake of my own ego, look how good I can create. God's creation is always for the benefit of others. So I don't think God needed any of these things. It wasn't for him to have some darkness. It wasn't for him to have a place to escape to, but instead out of his goodness to not only create in humanity, but to create and be hospitable and to give gift and all these things. God's creativity is always for the benefit of others, which oftentimes we see these beautiful things of creativity within our world that do benefit others. I remember one of my favorite lines from Dave Grohl talking about writing his music. He's like, you write a song for one reason, you sing it out to a crowd of 10,000 people, and they sing it back to you for 10,000 different reasons. Like, there's this beautiful picture of he gave that gift of his own self and his own story and what he was thinking of, and then it benefits others. So we do lots of beautiful things like that with our creativity as it is, but God had no need other than the need to continuously give of himself and for the sake of others.
I don't know that I agree with you on the thought that God's primary end was others focused.
Sure.
Just because, like, if you think about, now we're bringing New Testament into the creation story, so I recognize that. But when we think about Christ as the one through redemption bringing back the restoration of the original intent of creation, that everything ultimately will be found for Christ and in Christ and to Christ, right? That's the end of Romans 8 or Romans 11. I want to say Romans 8, but I could be wrong. And that ultimately everything will be reconciled through Christ back, and then Christ will present it all to God, that it is ultimately going back to God. And so I don't know that, like, God created, I don't know that primarily I would say that it was others focused, because ultimately it was for himself. And I do think that there was just a joy in God creating that was the end unto itself.
I think, yeah, I appreciate the pushback. I would not say that those two have to be separate from one another. I think God just taking delight in creating also always ends up benefiting. Like, who God is and what he does will always have a benefit to others, even within, if we're bringing the New Testament in, within the Godhead itself. And so we see God doing all these things for the benefit and for the magnification and the glorification of the Son, who then takes all these things and presents them back to the Father. And so it's even within the triune Godhead, before humans' existence and all through our existence and into the end of time, even the Godhead's actions, and this is part of the support for the Trinity, are constantly even just going and giving to one another. And so yes, even then there's that benefit.
I see it. I guess I'm hesitant to say that I would be hesitant to convey the idea that God created for us, like that we were the end.
Right.
Right? That it was others focused for us. I think when you create, and because God is perfect love, everything that he creates is there's going to be no harm in what he creates. There's going to be no downside in what he creates. It's going to all be good.
Yeah.
But I do think that ultimately, like, and this is a philosophical thing because the Bible doesn't speak to what God's motivations were in the creation of the world.
Totally.
That I think that the purpose in the creation was just the joy of creating, that God as a perfect being was having fun making the world and the universe.
And like I said, I think, and I'll try to explain a little further, I think that's where they don't have to be separate, because God is so good and he is perfect. He will just create out of delight. But because he is perfectly loving, even when he's doing something unto himself to just
it will
make
only
something
benefit.
Beautiful, it will also lead to benefit of others. I
100.
don't think those are separate things.
I agree with that, but it just sounded to me like you were saying that the primary reason was for the benefit of others.
Right. And maybe I articulate it that way, but I just think as you're pushing back, and I like this conversation of just how perfect God is. He can't even just do something, even if he intended to, for his own glory and good, that doesn't end up benefiting others.
I'm with you on that 100%.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and to be fair, we're talking here out of the reading I've done on the nature of God and the heart behind creation, but all of that is based on people's meditations and reflections. The Bible doesn't let us know specifically what God's motivations were.
Yeah.
There is, and we are running out of time on this one, but there is a space though where that, it's good to reflect and think about it, but you definitely have consequences to that thinking in either way, right? That if God has done it all for people, then does man start to become the pinnacle of everything and more important than God even, right? And I think the other way, if you're saying, Doug, and I'm agreeing with all that, I'm not fighting it, but the danger of going, well, God is selfish is that, that would be like...
I never said God was selfish.
No, but you could...
Take it to an extreme.
Take it to an extreme, I'm thinking, right? That God is only doing it for himself and not thinking about others would be like the Greek gods and philosophy there that, God's just doing his own thing and we're just reaping the consequences of whatever his whims are, right? I think both of those are extremes. So I appreciate the conversation that way that, trying to think of this character of God, but agreeing with both of you that obviously whatever God's plan is always loving and the outcome is great for us, right? I think that's so good.
Just because I know we're hitting time calendar wise, but we did start the recording a little late, so I'll take the permission to say a couple things.
I give myself permission.
Yeah, totally.
I thought I was running this podcast. Like I don't.
It's not wrong. You do as long as he gives you permission.
I guess I just learned something about Kyle's character here. I thought
I understand the idea of humanity feeling like we become the center of everything. But isn't that the beautiful part of our experience of who God is? Like, if I just doting on my kids, they could think, I'm the center of the world.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with anything other than their experience of how loved they are, that they think they're the center of the world. And yet the parent, we know we're just doting on our kid in that moment, and we have all the other responsibilities we're bearing at the moment. And so humans testifying of God's expression of who he is always ends up with us feeling like we're the peak of everything because of only who God is, how good his gift is to us, that our experience and understanding of even the world itself and who God is makes us feel like we must be the center of his attention only because of how perfect his love is. That's just who he is, that we can't experience another way, or we can try to theorize around that. But this is who we've understood ourselves and him to be because of his perfect love towards us.
But I think that's a great thing when your kids are little.
Yeah.
I think if your kid is 30 and they still think I'm the center of the universe and I'm the only thing that matters, we have a problem.
True.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
I was going to say there's lots.
There has to come a point where we start to see the bigger picture beyond just that.
Yeah.
That's an essential foundational thing because we have to be built up in love.
Yeah.
But part of that love then realizes, wait a minute, you chose to love me because you are a good being, a good creation. Now we're speaking of God and parents.
Yeah.
And so parents have recognized there's humanity in the mix of that keeps all of us from perfection.
Yeah.
But if we're loving our kids well, yes, they do. As kids, just feel like the center of the universe. But hopefully at some point in their life, they start to see the bigger picture that is not just about them and that love was because of the choice of someone else.
Totally.
Yeah. And I would think God, same with us, right? Doesn't want us to just become, this pinnacle of creation and it's just all about us, but be like him, where we would continue to create and do things in love for others as well, right? So.
Which is where the adult, having grown up in that love, can see later as they mature how good the parent is and was, only because they grew up to realize I'm not the center of the world, but man, my dad made me feel that way.
Yeah.
And so now I can be that blessing to the rest of the world. I've been matured in through that way of expressing. You realize I am important and feel like I'm the center of the world to my dad, knowing I'm not. Whatever, maybe. Like an analogy definitely falls short somewhere. But it's just that's our experience. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, that probably takes us to the end.
Yeah.
I am grateful.
If I say so.
Just kidding. Thank you, Kyle, for your permission to end this podcast. And I'm thankful that God created the heavens and the earth. That is good news for me today. So, but thanks for joining us on this episode of Inverted Orthodoxy Podcast. If you would like to share your questions with us, which we love answering, please check out invertedorthodoxy.com, where you can do that, and rate and review us everywhere that you watch this podcast. We will see you guys next time.